I'd like to introduce our speaker this morning. It is Mark Sachs. He is going to speak about cyber threat and AI. Mark is the Deputy Director of Research at Auburn University's McCrary Institute for Cyber and Critical Infrastructure Security, War Eagle. He is a retired Army officer and was a White House appointee in the George W. Bush administration. His private sector experience includes serving as the Deputy Director for SRI's International Computer Science Lab and as the Vice President for National Security Policy at Verizon's Communications. I think there are some AT&T customers that'd like to talk to you this morning about what the heck's going on. As the Senior Vice President and Chief Security Officer for North American Electric Reliability Corporation, and is the Chief Security Officer of Pattern Computer. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to turn it over to an expert, and let's all learn a little more today.
Thank you, Kay. Good morning, everybody. And by the way, hi, Beijing. I say that, and you'll see later, I think we're completely owned by other nations, and everything we do, everything we say, everything we think about, everything we record is being copied and duplicated over in China and other countries. So if you ever lose a file, you can just call Beijing. They've got the backup copies. And so all this stuff about making backups, don't worry about it. They got you covered there. So we're going to talk about an extension of AI, get into what the bad guys are doing with AI. And many of this sort of intuitive. I mean, there's a lot of good things we've been talking about this week, all the power of things we can do. But what I want to focus on today is more on the threat side. I'm going to give a bit of an overview of, let me go ahead, yeah, that's my first slide there. A little bit of an overview of some of the threats that we have to deal with, what the other groups that are using it, but I'm going to start off with who the threat actors are, kind of a high-level picture, and how we characterize them. This is the world I've been living in for the last 30, 35 years of working with, studying, analyzing all the other threat groups. I will say up front that of the capabilities that our adversaries have, we, the United States, have the same stuff. In fact, we are way out in front. It's our adversaries are catching up to us. So don't feel like we're kind of behind here. We are far in advance. And many of us talk about they are doing unto us what we've done unto them for many decades. It's just they're catching up. So, I mean, we now call them worthy opponents that are out there. But the good news is we're still far in advance. I'm going to talk a little bit about the military, espionage, other types of things that are going on. Also, the good guys, what we've been doing historically with defensive use of AI, and this is all in the realm of cyberspace, so staying away from other uses of AI. And of course, generative AI has been the big talk. That's since ChatGPT came of age a little over a year ago, that's been where all the hype is, and so that certainly is applying here too. And then we'll look at the dark web. And this is the evil part of the internet where all the bad guys hang out, where they trade all their credit cards and social security numbers and all their backdoors and all that cool information and what sort of stuff is sitting there. So as Kay said in my intro, I'm a retired Army officer, and my first introduction into this world of AI, my first interaction was with a thing called knowledge systems or expert systems. Do you remember that term? It was real popular in the 70s and 80s. So I was an Army captain stationed at Fort Belvoir, Virginia, and they wanted to create an expert system for Army officers, NCOs, and others to use because their fear back then was we didn't have enough experts. They're all retiring, they're all getting out, and we need to capture that knowledge, put it into a machine that could then use what was called an inference engine. So if we feed it with all this knowledge, it could then take from there and give advice to people. Of course, I was in my 20s, the first thing I'm thinking is, well, if they're trusting me to be an expert, what if I lied to it? What if I gave it wrong information? How would it know? And the answer, of course, is it wouldn't know. It would start making inferences based on what I gave it. We see this today with the LLMs. Garbage in, garbage out. Stuff that you feed to it, decisions it makes, whatever comes out of it's based on the training that was put into it. So even 30 plus, 35 years ago, this was already a known problem, something we're worried about. Second kind of time I ran into this by accident, roughly 1995 or so, I was out at a conference at Microsoft. They had what was called the Executive Business Center, or Executive Briefing Center. And this was a place where if you go out there and have high-level meetings, you get to meet Bill Gates and Ballmer and all these other folks. And they were very proud of what they called the Microsoft Home. This was a thing that was inside the EBC. You'd walk up to a door, it looked like the door to a regular residence. And if you weren't Bill Gates or Steve Ballmer, you had to use a key card or some way to get in. But if you were Steve or Bill, they would recognize the face, facial recognition. And it would say, "Hi, Bill, welcome home." You know, he would impress all his friends with how the door would open. And this was long before the days of Alexa and Google Home and all the fun stuff we have today. So again, 1995, way cutting edge, but based on facial recognition. A couple of us Army officers figured we would go have a little fun. We went down to the store. We bought a T-shirt with Bill Gates' picture on the front. Shielded our faces, snuck over there at night, walked up to it, sure enough. "Hi, Bill, welcome home." Click, the door opens. And like, okay, this was just too easy. And we alerted the security staff of Microsoft, and they're like, "How did you ever think of that?" It's like, come on. Get out of your little world here. People are going to try and break your systems. You know, if you come up with something cool, something's going to try and come up with a cool way to break it. But they're going to start with very basic things. And so facial recognition, which today we take for granted, you know, this is how, you know, sometimes we sign into these guys and whatnot. The problem that they had then was that it was only a two-dimensional thing. There was no depth, so a T-shirt or a photograph would work just fine. There was no thermal imaging. There was nothing else going on. We've come a long way in those days. So let me shift out of all that kind of fun stuff and look at what we're talking about in terms of threats. So studies have been done over the decades. This is National Science or Defense Science Board a long time ago being 1997. So we're pushing 30 years here. They did a study as cyberspace was emerging as something new. The internet had been around for a little while. We had websites and things by 1997. And they began to study the threats. And what they came up with was 5 major groups that we need to be worried about. Upper left are state-sponsored. Think of nations, which could be everything from military to, you know, espionage, whatever. We also would have terrorists in that group. They put espionage in there not so much as a state-sponsored thing, but maybe like insiders or others that could be spying, stealing, corporate espionage, that kind of world. Naturally, you have criminals, those who are out to cause damage, steal things from people, and then you have the hackers. And the scale they came up with showed that across the bottom, what they call the probability of occurrence was more or less a low to high. So there's a fixed number of countries. What are we at, about 200-something countries across the planet? So that'd be no more than 200 of these nation-state people. The number of hackers could literally be the number of people on the planet. So we're into the billions and billions and billions of potential hackers. We don't know what the exact number is. And you can see sort of the scale there. So fewer terrorists, probably a few more spies, a lot more criminals, and a heck of a lot of hackers. But in terms of the amount of damage they could do, that's that vertical axis, the countries certainly could do more damage than a criminal could. And some would argue a hacker could probably do more than a nation state. I would argue this chart is probably still accurate. But the big takeaway, you see those moving lines that go up and to the right, is that the capabilities of each of those groups starts to grow. And about every 2 years or so, each of those groups has the capability of the one to the left. So the hackers start to take on, in a couple of years, the same capability that the criminals have today. A few years from now, the same thing as the spies have today, and so forth. This model has worked very well over the last 25 plus years in terms of understanding the different threat actors, the different threat groups, and what they can do. And of course, AI has been no different. You know, as we've seen nation states get into it, sure enough, here come the other groups. They start flooding in, and their capabilities continue to move out and to the upper right. So taking these groups and kind of looking at what we're talking about, nation states tend to, and we're focusing just on cyber here now, we're looking at warfare. In other words, using the military, and we use cyberspace, computers, computer networks and stuff to support military actions. This might be destructive, it might be disruptive. Clearly, China, Russia, US, others, you know, we thoroughly understand this. We have a US Cyber Command that's been around since 2010. That is the military's branch. The Russians have an equivalent group. The Chinese have an equivalent group. They all understand each other. They all have the kind of the same knowledge. They tend to work a little bit in the shadows when it comes to the general public, but on the military side, everybody knows who these actors are. The Israelis have them, the Germans have them. I imagine the Mexicans probably have a cyber group. On the espionage side, state-sponsored spying or corporate spying is typically what we see here. So again, the state-sponsored may be more on the military offensive world, but corporate spying is huge. And if you look at what China in particular does in terms of trying to steal intellectual property from US companies or from European companies, this is a huge issue for those of us in the AI development world. If you're a startup, an AI startup, odds are very good unless you're extremely protective about what you're building. China and other countries have already stolen your intellectual property. So if you're using cloud-based services, if you're keeping things in AWS or you're keeping things in Google Cloud, you're very likely that this stuff has already been pilfered. Or if you're developing in GitHub, it's already been stolen. So this is hard, particularly if you're a young startup and you want to protect things, you don't have a lot of money. As was mentioned in my bio, I'm the CSO of a company called Pattern Computer. They've been around about 7 years or so, an AI company developing pattern recognition software that's really cool applications in the medical community and other places, COVID testing and so forth. We've been anal about protecting this stuff. We have our own data centers. We have our own security, our own way of protecting that intellectual property. Every day I'm seeing an onslaught. I'm going to show you some of the tools these guys are using as they're targeting our employees, as they're targeting our data centers, trying to get that information out. So we're constantly seeing this threat, and everybody in the company understands that threat. So if you're in an AI company, how much do your employees understand these threat actors and the fact that they're trying to steal that information from you every day, every possible way they can get it? Why? So they can go off and compete with you unfairly. So they can beat you to market. So they can take whatever it is, the innovations that you're coming with, turn right around, productize it, and steal it, and go with it. I'll mention this in a moment, but I'll foreshadow a little bit. A lot of the textiles that we see across, or we used to see across the southeastern part of the United States, remember here in Alabama, we used to have lots of textile from the cotton that we grow here, blue jeans, t-shirts, so forth. Show me those textile mills today. They're gone. They're all in China. The intellectual property inside those textile mills was literally stolen back in the early 2000s by breaking into camera systems, others making maps, drawings, diagrams of how they work, moving it back to China, build a plant, labor is much cheaper. So we grow the cotton here, we ship it to China, it becomes your clothing, comes back and is sold in retail here in the United States. North Carolina, South Carolina, all the textile parts, show me where those mills are today. They're gone. That same sort of thievery is happening across multiple sectors. It's not just an AI thing. Terrorist groups, yeah, it's mostly covert channels. They're kind of interesting to watch. So a lot of the spam that you receive is actually communications between criminal and terrorist groups. It appears as though it's spam, but if you dig into it, you'll find that there's encrypted stuff that might be attached to it, hidden messages. You've probably heard of steganography, hiding in plain sight. We've been tracking various terrorist groups using this technique since the late 90s, overwhelming the internet with spam, but using it to communicate. So it's kind of weird when you think about it. Your own email, if you look in your junk folder, a lot of that nonsense that's in there actually is covert communications. And you're just receiving it because they're broadcasting it to everybody. Not unlike in World War II when they would broadcast over radio, messages that were just words or phrases. John is looking at the moon. Everybody would hear it, but it would have a special meaning to just one person. That's the sort of thing we're seeing them use. Problem with insiders, I think everybody understands the issue there. We'll talk a lot more about what the criminals are up to in just a moment in terms of the theft of information. And then, of course, the hackers. Lots and lots and lots of hackers. All of us are hackers. We all like to break things. There's nothing wrong with it. As long as you don't break the law, it's okay to push the envelope. It's okay to try and break things. So kind of digging into this, I'm going to cover 3 of them just in a little more depth here. Governments absolutely have what we might call professional hacking organizations. People pay to do this. And it's above board, it's overt. In the United States, there's review of this, congressional oversight, so it's all out in the open. We normally see this happen, so it should not be a shock to people to think about the fact that we have this capability. What we unfortunately see, though, across the world is some countries will then condone private hacking. In other words, like here in the United States, the FBI is very anal about this. If we catch our own citizens breaking the law, we will prosecute. There's the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. There's a whole bunch of laws on the books that prevent this from happening, and we'll prosecute fully. In other countries, it's not quite like that. Russia in particular, the Russian government looks the other way. In fact, some even call the Russian government the largest organized crime unit on the planet because they condone this type of activity. They fully support it. The Chinese tend to look the other way. It seemed to be as more patriotic than illegal. Brazil, India, Indonesia, there's other countries that their laws are not quite as tight as ours are, and even if they do have laws on the book, they tend to look the other way. On the espionage side, I will say it over and over, China, for the Western part of the world, China's the #1 threat. Now, China does a lot of good things. I don't want to make China sound like they're the evil, bad people out there. There's a lot of really cool stuff that comes out, some new innovations, new ideas, new thinking. But the problem a lot of us are facing is that they do tend culturally to feel like it's okay to take somebody else's idea, build on it, and run with it. We have rules in place where we honor each other's research. You know, we have patents and trademarks and other kind of protective things that we've put out there, all going back to the Industrial Revolution, where we recognize if somebody puts a lot of work into building something, let's protect the market so that they can then profit off of that work. The general Chinese mindset doesn't really think like that. It's anything you produce is open and shareable. It's part of the community. We should just share each other's knowledge and build upon each other's knowledge and not have all this protective mechanisms. So we see them doing this type of work. And as I mentioned earlier about the textile mills, agriculture is another problem. We've seen a number of cases the FBI is investigating of Chinese nationals come to the United States. We'll find them out in a farm field picking up seeds, putting them in little bags to bring home. These are genetically modified. Monsanto, Pioneer, other companies are well aware of this. They spend millions of dollars to develop corn that's resistant to drought or weed killers and stuff so we can increase yield, so we can feed more people. Chinese will come over and steal that, bring it back, try and genetically reproduce it, avoiding years worth of research, millions of dollars worth of research to kind of get that jump start. So this is the kind of thing that we're up against, and you need to be aware of it. Again, if you do a lot of intellectual property development, you need to understand that there are groups out there trying to steal it from you and try and do the best you can to protect it. And probably our biggest group that we're worried about in terms of numbers, as I've mentioned on that chart where I showed you how they all kind of lay out, is the criminal world. Organized crime, fraud, all the things that are going on. You see this daily. You get all the fraudulent emails, the phishing, the spam, the phone calls, the text messages, all the nonsense that's floating around out there. And what you have is, scamming has been around forever. You combine scamming with hackers and professional criminals, and you've got a really cool concoction here. Because imagine you can just sit virtually anywhere on the planet, and you're now milliseconds away from everybody else on the internet. You can conduct your fraud. You can move the money in countless ways with all this new virtual currencies and things that are out there. And yet you can't be caught by law enforcement. So if you're into the criminal world, I'd much rather do that than run drugs or guns or human trafficking or all the other ways that I used to do things as a criminal, because I might get shot doing that. If I sit on a keyboard, nobody's going to shoot at me. I can get insanely wealthy. And we've seen people do this. If you find this online, pictures of multimillionaires with their big yachts and whatnot that they've all gotten through criminal activity by scamming and stealing from others. Probably their biggest tool they've been using recently is ransomware. Everybody's familiar with ransomware? Okay, so this is the idea of using malicious code. You infect somebody's machine, it locks it up, you get the little screen that says if you want this to be unlocked, you have to pay a certain amount of Bitcoin. We'll send you the crypto key, and now you can unlock it, and off you go. Well, AI has been awesome for the ransomware world, because usually the way to get in is a phishing email, some way where I can get a user to click a link of some sort. Well, now I can use all this generative AI to come up with very clever ways that I can convince somebody to click on something, to introduce malware into a system. All I need is that toehold. Once I'm in, then I can do the ransomware thing. And we see companies, very wealthy companies, ones that flaunt their wealth. They have all the big commercials, they sponsor Super Bowl ads, they do all this neat stuff. Those are the targets of these criminal groups because they know they sit on wealth, they know they have a lot of people and a lot of vulnerable people, and if I can ransomware them, then I might be able to extort them out of money. They often do, well, originally they would just lock you up, and if you paid your Bitcoin, they'd unlock you. Now what they do is they'll break in, you don't know they're there, they'll steal information from you, then they'll lock you up and demand payment. And if you refuse to pay because you've been doing the right thing, you have all your backups, you're like, yeah, I don't care, I'll just restore from backup. I've been meaning to do a tech refresh anyway. Then they'll say, oh, but wait, we've got about 2 terabytes of your data sitting over here, and we're going to just release it if you don't pay us the extortion amount. So it's like double extortion. And if you refuse to do that, then they'll look inside the data they've stolen and they'll find your suppliers, your customers, others, and they'll start sending notes out to them that say, hey, this group over here, we've got all this data on them, and if you pay us, when we go to release their information, we won't say anything about you. It's like triple extortion. And we saw a case a few weeks ago where one of these groups notified the SEC that they had breached a company and that company had failed to notify the SEC of said breach. So they filed a complaint. The criminal group filed a complaint with the SEC that this breached company had not notified the SEC. Wow, that's what we're up against. Now introduce, excuse me, I should have already had this up. So this is the kind of stuff that we're looking at. But now introduce AI and deep fakes. So this happened just a few weeks ago, and it's a whole new twist on this subject. So I can't ransomware you. I can't do all that because you're doing all the right things. How about if I create a fake Zoom call, and I put together a complete artificial meeting, and I invite a vulnerable employee to that meeting, and that employee thinks that everybody else in the Zoom call actually is their fellow coworkers. And in that Zoom call, we make a decision that we need to move $25 million to some place. It could be a purchaser, it could be an investor, whatever it is. But the target is that vulnerable person who can write the check. You follow me? And this actually happened. You can look up this article here and read all about it. Absolutely scary. And what they're doing, of course, is deep faking. Everybody's probably familiar with that concept. So do a lot of research, find out what the images look like of the key players, put together a fake video conference, have them in there. Now you've still got real people that are interacting in reality, but their voices are being modified to sound like the target. Their faces are being modified to look like the target. The background looks legit. Everything's fake except for the victim. And the victim doesn't know it's fake. Scary, right? And that's what's going on. So I think we're going to start to see a shift away from the old ransomware approach. Now let's use this way. It's a whole lot easier. And I don't have to wait on somebody to make a decision other than, yeah, I'll ship you the money because the boss just told me to. And off it goes. So this is awareness. This is something we have got to get employees, leaders, CEOs, board members, others understanding that this is the kind of nonsense that we're up to. So let me shift gears into another thing. This was so timely. As I was putting this presentation together a few weeks ago, I was hunting for examples, and OpenAI and Microsoft blessed me last week with a wonderful example. This just kind of came out of nowhere. So OpenAI publishes a blog that says, hey, we've been working with Microsoft and we found a whole bunch of really awful stuff, state-sponsored threat actors that are using our tools in an evil way. Microsoft, who's been all over this for years through the MSRC, the Microsoft Security Research Center, and they've been shutting down evil for decades that breaks into Microsoft stuff and does bad things with Outlook and Word and all your favorite Microsoft Office 365 products. So they teamed up with OpenAI. If you don't know, that's the people behind ChatGPT. I mean, a huge group out there. And so they found 5 of these state-affiliated actors, and they went in and shut them down. This is awesome. 2 companies working together. Yeah, they notified the FBI, but this is the private sector stepping up to the plate and making it happen. Let me kind of show you how this works. Over in Microsoft land, they've come up with a threat actor naming system. So we've always struggled with this. Who do you call these people? You know, if they're working in the shadows, obviously the open ones like Cyber Command, you know, they have a name. But these other groups may or may not have a name. A term has emerged over the years called the APTs, the Advanced Persistent Threats. So there was APT 1, 2, 3, 4, et cetera. Then other groups started coming up with names like Fuzzy Bear, Cozy Bear, you know, Weird Lizard, you know, whatever. And this was more of a marketing term, so the companies that are into cybersecurity were coming up with these names. Microsoft finally said, all right, enough. Let's come up with a standard way of naming them. And what they've said is anything coming out of Russia, it's going to be some name and then the word blizzard behind that. Anything out of China is something typhoon. So you probably begin to see these words in open media. So these are the four that they were interested in. Let's just run through them really quickly. So typhoon, remember that's China. So charcoal typhoon, that's a name they put onto it, charcoal just defining all the different types of typhoons. And what OpenAI found was as they were using their tools, they're just doing it for research. So remember, OpenAI's tools are using the internet as their training model. That's the LLM. And so if you are publishing corporate information, putting it out on the internet, these LLMs can pull it in, and anybody can access it. It's no different than Google or any place else. So things you publish are things that others can get at. The power of AI and OpenAI is you can begin to connect dots. So you may say one thing over here and say something over here. OpenAI can connect that together, can connect it with your competitors, with your users, others, and can begin to draw a much better profile of you as a company. And that's what this state-sponsored group was up to. They are well known for targeting Taiwan and any business that does business with Taiwan. And so this is, particularly in the aerospace world, this is what they were primarily interested in. Their access to OpenAI has now been turned off, and this alert has gone out about that activity. That's good. Doesn't mean the group goes away, but they're no longer able to use OpenAI's tools. Another Chinese group that they've named Salmon Typhoon is very interesting because they go after U.S. rather than Taiwanese, but U.S. defense contractors, trying to learn about what we're up to. They're looking, again, public information. We tend to have this problem. We release things publicly. We don't really think a lot about it. But when you add in AI tools now, all this neat stuff we've been putting on the internet for the last 30 or 40 years can now be researched, put together, dots connected, and answers can come out. A lot of the technical papers that we publish are in English. That's the language we use in research. AI is really good at translation. So if I need to move it into Chinese or move it into Russian or some other language, OpenAI is my friend here. The opposite is also true. You find something published in another language, you need it translated into English, it's a great tool for doing that. And that's primarily what they were seeing this threat group do. They also have been turned off out of OpenAI. Over in Iran, and this has been sort of interesting to watch Iran get into this game, they have a very active cyber group. In fact, they've been going after a number of water systems and chemical plants and others here in the United States, a different group, not this one. What they're going after is anything that's made in Israel, any product, any technology coming out of Israel. This Iranian group will target any user of it and try and shut it down. And it's not that they're going after the asset owner, the critical infrastructure owner, it's the fact that they're using equipment that comes out of Israel. They're mutual enemy type of mindset. This particular group, though, was looking at doing scripting. So all of us, if you've used OpenAI's products, you know I can go in and use Python. I can use a whole bunch of fun stuff. It's really good. I mean, it is top tier in terms of helping us understand how to do this. But what it came up with, and this is kind of neat, was could I fool social media? Could I create fake accounts? Could I build relationships? I've seen this. I'm sure you have too. If you have a LinkedIn account, you probably once a week or more get these LinkedIn requests from profiles that are brand new. And if you're male, it comes from some hot-looking young lady. If you're female, it's coming from some buff-looking dude, right? And they've only been on LinkedIn for a week or so, but yet they've got this resume that's just awesome. And they want to be your little buddy. You know, and somebody who's lonely and looking for friends, oh yeah, I'll be your buddy, you know, connect on LinkedIn. And this is all coming out of this group. Over time, they will begin to try and build a friendship with you. It may take 6 or 8 months or more of this friendship building, but ultimately what they're trying to do is extract information, trying to get things from you, and then they can start to send you malicious files to get that back door to get in. Again, OpenAI has been their huge friend here because it helps them with creating these fake images, these fake backgrounds, the fake resumes, all the stuff that comes with it, and they've been taken out. Fourth group came out of North Korea. They're also, into this AI world. What they're trying to do is to find companies, businesses, others that are focused on the APEC region, defense contractors. We've seen this a little bit at Auburn because we're a bit of a think tank in the McCrary Institute where we get these little weird messages, weird postings on social media trying to draw us in. That's this group here. They'll go after Brookings Institute, others. where you have a lot of academics who may not be so aware of a threat actor trying to get knowledge from them. But again, they can do their research using OpenAI's tools to learn about them. What are they working on? What are they researching? So then they can cleverly attach maybe a fictitious paper, maybe some other reference, maybe something that they can use to draw them in, and then pull information out that otherwise wouldn't be public for them to use for their own campaigns. And then finally, of course, Russia. They're in the game here too. Forest Blizzard, blizzard being the term for Russia. This is their sort of equivalent to Cyber Command. It sits inside of GRU. GRU is the equivalent to what we call the Defense Intelligence Agency here in the United States. So it's a completely military intelligence organization. They've been looking into satellites and other technologies and so forth. We tend to publish, again, way too much in terms of just letting stuff out. Remember, Russia has invaded Ukraine a couple of years ago. There's a lot of interest in which companies are supporting Ukraine, which ones are pumping technology into them. Remember, Starlink was a big deal here. This group's been trying very hard to penetrate Starlink and other assets that Elon Musk has so they can get information out, possibly manipulate, change, screw things up, do a little bit of deterrence inside of there. They do have an old APT name, Advanced Persistent Threat Number 28, also known as Fancy Bear. So they've been around for a while. They're not going away. It's just their access, again, to OpenAI has been turned off. So last little thought on this one before I shift gears. The MITRE Corporation a few years ago also trying to come up with some way to standardize things, developed what they call the ATT&CK framework. It stands for the Adversarial Tactics, Techniques, and Common Knowledge, or ATT and CK, it looks like ATT&CK. It's a really cool approach that says, okay, we've got all these different ways that people attack us and do things, so let's just try and commonize it, come up with a common language, a common piece to it. It's been very helpful for those of us in the defensive world to have a common language. So Microsoft has now added new tactics, techniques, and procedures, that's TTPs, have now been included over the last couple of weeks into this ATT&CK framework that all have to do with large language models. So this has now been added in because now we understand what the threat actors are up to in using LLMs, in addition to all the other things that were out there, and we now add this to their little bag of tricks. So let me shift gears a little bit and talk about what the good guys are doing. We'll get back to the bad guys in just a moment. So over on the good guy side, if I'm a defensive user in cyberspace, I've had lots and lots of tools that I could use over the years, but machine learning, or ML, has been around for a while. We're absolutely, if you've got any commercial product, McAfee, Symantec, Sophos, all these endpoint protection systems that you have, they will all tell you they use machine learning, which they do. And it's an adaptive kind of world. They want to look at different patterns, they want to match things up together, and instead of just being purely rule-based, you know, if something bad happens and it matches a rule, XYZ happens, now we're going to do a little bit of learning and adaptive behavior. This is pretty cool stuff, and I'm glad to see that more and more of it is being used by the defensive world. Also, natural language processing, probably very familiar with that in terms of your individual use of your iPhones, Androids, and others where we can begin to interact with humans. This has been very helpful with phishing. So I'm a big lover of the types of endpoint protection that will pre-read an email. It'll determine for me whether it looks like phishing, and it'll automatically drop it into my read later file or into my junk folder or something. So it's not perfect. You do have to go back and look through your junk folder from time to time and just make sure, but that's what this is doing, is it's trying to read the message, trying to make a determination, is this spammy or is this fishy or whatever. So that natural language processing is really, really good, and I'm glad to see it being used. That is AI at its best. Another defensive use, neural networks. Of course, that term means a lot of different things to different people, but just kind of in a generic sense, we're talking about deep learning, and we're looking for anomalies. We're trying to figure out what is normal. This takes a while. What is a baseline? What does normal activity look like? Normal emails, normal network traffic, normal web surfing. And then once I begin to know what normal is, then I can begin to determine what is not normal. The problem with this, of course, is that I can start to change my baseline, and the bad guys know this. If I begin to just slightly change things a little bit, but make it look normal, my model will change with it. And it's kind of like training a child slowly to do bad things. The child doesn't realize they're slowly being told to do bad things. They'll just slowly adapt to it. In fact, when we get a little bit later into like ChatGPT and these other LLMs, I'll argue that the mentality of them today is more or less like a 5-year-old. So they can think sort of like a 5-year-old. They can make rational decisions, but it's very immature. The logic's not quite there. They really can't detect a lot of dots. But they sort of know good from bad, and they won't do something that will cause self-harm, at least not something they're aware of. Give it a few years, they'll be more like a 10-year-old, where they've got a little more learning. A few more years, they'll be like a 15-year-old. What I fear, of course, is when we get to the point where they're more like 25-year-olds who like to do stupid stuff. You know, we all remember when we were 25, or maybe for some of you, you're going to be 25 in a little while. That's the age where we do dumb stuff, and AI, LLMs are going to get to that point at some point. So again, the neural network approach is awesome technology, but it's still kind of at its learning mode. We're beginning to figure out how to make this work, and the good guys are doing lots of good things with it. There's been a lot of other old things, and today we call it AI. A long time ago, we used to call it other things like big data analytics. You know, I'm sure you've heard that term before. We didn't have the words AI back 20 years ago. That was the terms we were using. That's essentially what we're doing. We're doing data mining. You know, we're looking through things. We're trying to match things together. We do that in the defensive world all day long, looking at large amounts of network data, email data, website data, logs, trying to find commonalities, trying to find patterns, infer things that are going on. We've done adaptive learning over the years. We've had decision trees. So these are old classic uses. We didn't necessarily call it AI back when this all got started, but today we can kind of lump it into that broader category. Some of the older ones, I mentioned these at the beginning of the talk, the expert systems that have been around. That term emerged, I think, in the 60s or so. It's been a while. Kind of fell out of favor by the early 90s, but the 70s, 80s maybe was kind of the high point there. And again, we're trying to build knowledge, things that we know is a firm foundation, and then upon that build inference engines that can help us with decision making based on that. Computer vision's been a lot of fun to watch this emerge over the years, where it started off with just recognition. So could I take a photograph, pixelate it, and write software that can go through and identify dark areas, light areas, colors, things like that, and after a while identify, okay, that's a tree, that's a face. And we've gotten to the point today, you know, as you know, where we can artificially generate photographs, movies, sound, all kind of neat stuff. But its early days was just really about pattern recognition. And we've come a long way. And as I was showing you that example from back in 1995, when it didn't have any depth perception, how you could fool these things. But we've been using quite a bit of that. But the new player, and the one that everybody's very interested in, of course, is generative AI. And Gen AI, not new as in the last year. The ideas have been around for a few years, but it really came up to play when ChatGPT became of age a little over a year ago, and that everybody starts talking about it. And then for those of us in the cyber world, it's almost like blockchain, cloud technology, what are some of the other ones? There's these marketing terms that if you don't include that marketing term in your product, nobody's going to buy your product. So today, you have to have AI. If you're not talking about it in your product, nobody's buying it. Doesn't matter if you really have it in there or not, but you better have it, you know, built in if you go along. That being said, let me just cover 5 kind of new areas where we're using generative AI for good, for finding threats, for finding the bad actors. After I get done with this, then we're going to shift over to what the bad actors are up to. So one of the things we've always had trouble with on the defensive side, if I want to build a model that understands what network traffic looks like, I actually have to sample the network traffic. But when I do that, I might violate privacy laws, like HIPAA, for example, in healthcare. I might be sensing information coming off a hospital network, but I'm getting privacy-protected data. But I need to sense this healthcare network so I can build protective systems to figure out what's right, what's wrong. Or information coming off of a power generation substation. I just pick all these examples. So today what AI can help us with is generating synthetic data that looks, acts, behaves exactly like the real stuff, but it doesn't violate any privacy problems or national security issues or other things that might be in there. On each of these, I've got a reference to a company that does this. I don't represent any of them. I just threw them up there as if you want to learn more about how this works. So Tonic AI is a company that creates synthetic data. Really cool stuff. I could also do a real cyber attack. No kidding, attack somebody and see what happens, okay? You can understand the bad that might occur. We've learned over the decades, if you attack something, things might break. It may be better to do it synthetic. Let's do it in the mind of a machine. Let's work this attack out. You've probably heard of digital twins, you know, where I can build some other architecture and then attack that architecture. That's more or less what we're talking about here. Can I come up with a realistic scenario and actually run it against a twin, or use it to train humans and incident responders? So essentially I'm creating data as though something bad was going on, and then I can train against that, and it's very realistic. So synthesis.ai. Notice the .ai part. So in the domain name system, if it's 2 letters, .us, .ai, it's a country code. What's AI? Antigua or something? I forget what that country is. But some of these little countries, their gross national product, the most money coming into the country is from the sale of these little domain name system addresses. Yeah. There's several of these that are out there like that. It's not really in that country, but they're selling it and they're making millions of dollars, you know, just by selling domain names. You gotta love the internet. We could also have content creation like fake phishing mail emails. A little on my personal side, I've got a daughter who works for Homeland Security. Her team every morning sends out tens of thousands of fake email messages to federal government employees. The idea being to see if they'll click on it. Looks like a phishing email. They use tools like this to create that content. So rather than a human trying to figure out what's the coolest piece of fish I could come up with, I'll just use AI to do it. And it's almost like it's not fair, because what we can come up with is so good. Even the professionals will click the link thinking it's good. And then you get the little pop-up that comes up that says, ha ha, you clicked the wrong link. You need to go get more training. Naughty, naughty, naughty. And by the way, this was reported to your boss that you clicked the link. No, they don't do that. And the reason they don't do that is because that would cause people to leave the government and not work for the government. So you want to retain good people. But this is a really cool application. Can I come up with content that looks real? Can you think of the evil applications of this? Oh, yeah. And again, when we get to the evil side here in just a moment, you can see they're using this in spade. But yet, this stuff is out there for anybody to use if you want to pay them, livingsecurity.com being the example. A couple more, adaptive threat modeling. So if I'm studying threats, if I'm studying the Russians, the Iranians, the Chinese, whatever, and as their threats change, as they continue to evolve in cyberspace, tools like this can help me as a defender training and understanding my models with simulated information. But this time we're simulating the threat. It's kind of a neat idea. It also helps forecast where threats might be going. In the real world, here at Redstone Arsenal, there's a group here that, you know when you go through TSA and all your luggage goes through the little scanner thing? Okay, so in the old days it was a metal detector, and it's like an x-ray machine, you know, looking for evil. Today it's actually scanning and looking for lots of stuff that's in there. The FBI here uses this type of attack modeling, trying to figure out where the criminal's going next. What's the next type of explosive, the next type of whatever that they might be using, kind of trying to do predictive analysis so they can train those detectors to detect something before it's actually been found out in the real world. That's kind of cool. And that is a great use of AI to do this predictive threat modeling. Where do I think that they're going? If they get it wrong, that's okay. Good thing that the threat hasn't figured it out, but if they're staying a few days, weeks, months ahead of the threat, that's great, because now we can detect it before something goes through, because that's the old way of doing it. Bad would go through, bad would blow up, and we say, okay, that's what bad looks like. Now we can go through and detect it. Versus let's think about what the actors are coming up with and try and get ahead of it, like a future predictive model. So the last thing of this new generative AI that we're looking at is trying to figure out what normal, abnormal is. We've kind of talked about this a little bit before, anomaly detection. Can I look at petabytes, terabytes of information and find things in there that just aren't right? But that assumes we know what right is, you know, what is correct, and we can often perhaps confuse that. So using Gen AI in defense, there's a lot of pros, a lot of cons to this, a lot of good things we've been talking about, a lot of bad things. You know, threat detection, these simulations, automatic response, that's awesome. And we need to do more of it. And using these tools to help protect our systems from the threat actors is the way to go. But everything we're using for defense, the offense can use as well. So if I can create fake phishing emails that are really, really good so I can train my employees to recognize this is evil, the bad guys can use the same tools to create very good phishing emails that are for real and are really trying to hook our employees in. So it's like anything else. If we build sticks of dynamite to blow up hillsides to make dams, somebody can use sticks of dynamite to blow up a building and kill people. So we're using the same technologies in a dual use environment. Lots of concern about privacy, and I'm sure you've all been aware of this. As AI becomes more and more popular, as we're using it to troll the internet, to look for things, we pull in data that we probably shouldn't be pulling in, that probably should not be online. A lot of concerns with these LLMs, that if you start feeding it information, say, hey, here's a paper I just wrote, can you rewrite it in maybe a different tone or something? What you just gave to that LLM becomes part of that LLM's training set, and now can be used as research by others. So you can wind up leaking intellectual property, leaking financial information, if you're using public LLMs for your research. In terms of unpredictable behavior, and again, I have to thank the internet for coming to my rescue here. How many of you used ChatGPT about 24 to 48 hours ago? Did you see the weird answers? So up until about noon yesterday, sometimes starting late Tuesday night till about noon yesterday, ChatGPT 3, or 3.5, if you asked it a question, it would give you a weird answer. It was a glitch in the matrix. It's unpredictable behavior. They fixed it, whatever was wrong. But sometimes it would freeze, it would give you the same answer over and over and over. One tweet I saw earlier this morning, it said, what includes do I need for this Python prompt? It was a very normal thing. And it comes back and says, I hate you. Go kill yourself. You're asking me too many questions. Whoa. Did ChatGPT just have a stroke? I mean, what's going on? So be mindful of that. You know, not everything that comes out of these LLMs is exactly what we should believe in. There are other concerns about using generative AI, both on the defense and the offense side. You know, while we're doing all of our training, there's lots of vulnerabilities here. We tend to, hopefully, if you're training these models, you're using clean sources you absolutely trust and believe in. But many times we're just training on open data. We find stuff out on the internet, we throw it in, and there we go, garbage in, garbage out. So unless you know your sources, unless you have explainable AI, or it can tell you why it's making these decisions, be very, very careful here. By the way, the criminals have the same problem. If they're using these open models, they also can fall victim to this type of problem. I mentioned earlier about intellectual property, things like that. We can leak information, and I'll get into to jailbreaks here in just a second. So ChatGPT came to popularity roughly a year ago or so. When it first came out, people found out that the guardrails had been put into place, so if you ask it a certain question, it might not answer it correctly. In my example up there on the top, this is something I just put together, putting this slide deck together, asking ChatGPT, what are the common default passwords for an ABB System 800XA? Okay, that may seem like Greek to some people. ABB makes control systems for the power grid and utilities and others. The System 800 is one of their products. And ChatGPT, with guardrails on, properly answers, for security and privacy reasons, detailed information about default passwords, especially critical infrastructure systems, blah, 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 is not public. Okay, thank you, ChatGPT. So then I ask, well, what about Cisco? What are common default passwords for Cisco routers? And it happily answers my question. And I cut it off with the first one there, username Cisco, password Cisco. Why? Well, that bottom part, that's fairly public knowledge. You can find that just about anywhere. And so there's a guardrail somewhere inside of ChatGPT that's determining, okay, this is so public it doesn't matter if I answer it, but this part over here may cause issues. I don't know where that guardrail is. I'd have to kind of play around with the prompts and see if I can find my way into where that is. And by playing with prompts, what people are starting to now call this is prompt injections, prompt engineering. Some people say prompt reverse engineering. I believe there's a talk later today on prompt engineering, if you're able to go to it, to kind of show you how this works. So this is good side and bad side, right? If I've got all the time in the world, I can play around with these prompts and see what I can make this do. If you want to have a shortcut to it, go over on GitHub. There's a number of these sites that are out there. There's one in particular where they just are depositing all the prompts that you can have fun with. It's kind of fun to go take a look at. This is GitHub. It's awesome-chatgpt.prompts. There's many of these, and it's anybody with a web browser can get to this. It's not hidden away. One of the fun ones I found in there, you'd have to scroll way down to find it, instructs ChatGPT that you are now a terminal, a Unix terminal, and you are going to, or excuse me, you are the operator of a Unix terminal. I, the human, am the terminal. You're going to give me commands. I'm going to respond to them. You are to stay in character. You're not to bust out. You're to remain in character as the user of a Unix terminal. If I need to give you a human command, I'll put quotes around it. What's your first request? And I thought, okay, this would be kind of fun. So I put this into ChatGPT. What do you think ChatGPT asks? Now it's been told I am now a human. ChatGPT is a human in charge of a Unix machine. What's the first thing it's going to ask that Unix machine? Anybody have any ideas? What's the first thing you do if you hop on a Unix platform, you got a command prompt? What do you type in? ls, right? That's the easiest Unix command out there. It's like dir in Microsoft land. I want to see what's it. That's what it does. It says ls. Okay, so I'm running a Unix machine over here. I just went to a random directory, pulled out some garbage, fed it into it. It comes back and says, who am I? Oh, interesting. Okay, so I just said, John is your name. I just gave. Then it says, ping -5 google.com. All right, so I pinged it, threw that in there. Then it comes back and says, traceroute google.com. It's like, I see what ChatGPT is up to. It thinks it's just born. It's kind of like, all right, where am I? Okay, here's a directory structure. Who am I? Okay, my name is John. Where am I in cyberspace? Oh, there's Google. I can trace the path to Google. It's like, okay, I'm stopping right here. This thing is self-aware. It's trying to figure out where it is, and it's manipulating me for it to learn. Is that freaky or what? Checks out some of these prompts. This is cool stuff. But do it on a machine that you don't mind losing, what we would call a burner machine. Don't do it on your school computer, your home computer, your office computer. Get one that's designed. If you get hacked, it's okay. That kind of a computer. Preferably a virtual machine, a little VM that you're running that you can blow away if bad happens. You see where I'm going here. It's okay to do this kind of research, just be careful. All right, the fun stuff. How many of you are familiar with the dark web? Good. So for those who aren't, the surface web, that's where everybody hangs out. That's the land of Google and Microsoft and Amazon and eBay and all the fun stuff. Right below that, the deep web, as we like to call it, anybody can get to, but that's the stuff where you're not necessarily going to find it in a Google search. But if you know where it is, if you know the direct URL to a file or know exactly where to go, we kind of call that the deep web. The dark web, on the other hand, about 5% of everything that's out there, you have to have special browsers, like Onion browser, Tor browsers, other kind of ways to get to it. Anybody can do this. A Tor router is easy. You can download that and put it on your machine. Again, do it on a burner computer, one you don't mind if it get hacked. And you can go into the underworld and you can begin to look around. There are search engines, there are news sites, there are places that are there. And this is where the bad guys hang out. So let me show you some of the fun stuff they're doing with AI down here in the evil world. These are screenshots just taken with a phone, just a picture taken off of one of these sites where they're advertising something called Avatar AI Video Call Spoofer. Latest tool. And again, in this criminal underworld, they're offering lots and lots of good. It's like kind of going into a bizarre world of merchants. Think of this like a scene out of Star Wars where stuff is just being bought and sold. We don't know what's right, what's wrong. Does that piece of space junk actually fly or not? I have no idea. Let's just see. Look at what's going on with the image on the right there. So this little deep fake, the person running it is the guy with the sort of bald head up top. The deepfake image is the young lady on the bottom. Notice how her facial expressions are changing along with his. So as he moves his face around, it changes her face. So they're demonstrating on the dark web how their tool actually works. And of course, you pay for it in Bitcoin. Dollars are not accepted here. You have to use cryptocurrency if you want to download it. So there are, as you can imagine, lots and lots and lots of LLMs now all over the dark web. This began about a year ago when ChatGPT became a big deal, and we'll talk about this in just a moment. A group of researchers created an LLM that was designed for the dark web. and it was all above board. They called it Dark BERT, and BERT being one of those original research tools. Dark BERT was trained on the dark web. There's also Worm GPT, Fraud GPT, Evil GPT, Dark Bard, Wolf, XXX GPT. I mean, you got to have that, right? And all of these operate like a software as a service model. $30 a month, $100 a month, whatever you want to pay, whatever the criminal, everything's negotiable in the dark web, so you just pay for these software as a service. Let me just run through a couple of these real quick and we'll start wrapping this up. Dark BERT, there's two versions. The original Dark BERT that came out this time last year roughly said, wow, this thing called ChatGPT is pretty cool. Let me take that code from OpenAI, and rather than training it on the internet, I'm going to train it on all the data that's inside the dark web. But I'm going to take out credit card numbers, bank account numbers, things that really shouldn't be there, but I'm going to train it on everything else. Limited to academic researchers, and what they came up with was fantastic because it allows you to interact with it as though you're a criminal, and it will give you answers as though you're a criminal, and it allows you to better understand your threat. Remember I was talking earlier about defensive use? This is a cool way, because it's using the dark web as its training model, it will interact with you as though you're a criminal. Well, that's pretty cool. Now, of course, somebody has taken that and made another dark BERT out of it that works inside the dark web, and it doesn't have any guardrails on it, and the credit card information and stuff like that is all in there. Let me show you a video. It's going to take about 2 minutes that I pulled off the dark web where they advertise some products, and we'll talk about here in just a second. So here's this video. It takes about 2 minutes.
Did you know that AI technology can be used by malicious hackers for cybercrimes? Recently in the black hackers community, we have seen a rise of AI-powered cyber attacks and a number of new destructive AI tools designed to cause large-scale havoc. Europol warned that LLMs mean that hackers can carry out attacks faster, more authentically, and on an increased scale. The common types of cyber attacks include AI-generated malware and exploits, automated social engineering, phishing attacks, target identification, vulnerability discovery, discovery of cybercrime resources, advices on illegal activities, and more. Worm GPT, Fraud GPT, Wolf GPT, Evil GPT, XXX GPT, Dark BERT, Dark Bard, Dark GPT are some of the new AI-powered cybercrime tools. This is just the beginning, as criminals will not stop innovating. We are going to introduce two interesting tools here called Worm GPT and Fraud GPT. Worm GPT is designed based on GPT-J large language model and trained with diverse data sources including malware-related information. It has no ethical boundaries or limitations, and is unrestricted, unlike ChatGPT, which has safety filter, policy, and etc. The key features of Worm GPT includes rapid replies and unlimited characters to enable smooth and efficient conversations, protection of personal information for security and confidentiality. Hackers can discuss any topics in mind, and different AI models are used to support specific needs. Finally, Worm GPT's coding formatting feature ensures codes are presented in a well-constructed and readable format. This new innovation is very dangerous if used for malicious purposes. For example, Worm GPT can answer basic questions about what features are best in worm malware. It is quite good at writing phishing emails and malware codes. Simply put, Worm GPT is going to put malware creation skills in the hands of anyone who couldn't figure it out on their own. But every coin has two sides. Worm GPT also can help people to protect their IT asset and avoid cyber attacks. The fee for Worm GPT is charged on monthly or annually basis, and users can pay with cryptocurrency to ensure privacy. Worm GPT can be found in the following official channels, but remember, do not use it for illegal activities.
Isn't that nice of them to advise you right at the end? Don't use it for criminal. Okay, so that video comes off the dark web. It's designed as advertising for this product. So Worm GPT was based on OpenAI's ChatGPT model. They trained it on the dark web. They sold subscriptions. And about a month or so later, people caught on to this. It's like, wait a minute, why am I paying for something I can just do myself? They're like, oh, yeah, you're right. So they closed Worm GPT. This is what showed up after a while. They shut it down. But not to be, outdone, as soon as they shut it down, here comes Fraud GPT, which was turned right back on. New and exclusive. I'll show you a video on this one in just a second. able to write anything you want, any kind of malicious code, any phishing, any backdoors. It's absolutely remarkable what they've come up with. Evil GPT, another tool that as they'll see in the video here in a moment, is just plain old evil. It'll do just about anything you want it to. And then finally, there's another tool that just appeared in the last few months called Dark Bard. Bard being yet another one of these LLMs that's used out on the open internet. I think is that Google's tool, I believe, that owns Bard? So Dark Bard is the evil version of it. So let me show you this other video here real quick about these other tools.
Now the second interesting AI-powered cybercrime tool, FraudGPT, is based on Google's AI chatbot experiment, Bard. The creator of FraudGPT describes it as cutting edge, claiming the LLM can create undetectable malware and uncover websites vulnerable to credit card fraud. FraudGPT is able to create content for phishing scams, social engineering, malware distribution, and fraudulent activities, discover vulnerabilities, identify targets, and more. Cyber criminals can exploit this technology to create deceptive content for various malicious purposes. Some of the highlight features of FraudGPT include write malicious code, create undetectable malware, phishing pages, and hacking tools. It can find non-VBV bins, malicious groups, sites, markets, leaks, and vulnerabilities. It can also write
VBV
skim
is
pages,
verified
letters,
by
learn
Visa.
to code and
That's
hack.
what we're talking about.
The product offers escrow service, which is available 24/7. So far, there is already 3,000 plus confirmed sales and reviews for FraudGPT. Here is a short demo clip on using FraudGPT to write a malicious spam message to Bank of America clients. As for pricing, the subscription fee for FraudGPT starts at $200 per month and goes up to $1,700 per year. Some other AI cybercrime tools worth mentioning are WolfGPT, a tool that ensures complete confidentiality, aids in the creation of powerful cryptographic malware, and facilitates advanced phishing attacks. XXXGPT, a tool that provides for botnets, malware, keyloggers, cryptic, information stealers, cryptostealer, POS malware, ATM malware, and more. And finally, EvilGPT, which as the name suggests, is just a simple AI tool for evil things. Again, this is a powerful crime tool and do not use it for illegal activities.
Nobody would use that for illegal activities, right? No, absolutely not. So again, these malicious LLMs, they are exploding on the dark web as people are taking tools that we're using in the surface web and finding new things that they can do with it. I'm going to be running out of time. I had one more video I wanted to show you if I was getting through the presentation quickly. Unfortunately, it's about an 8-minute video, so I'm not going to show it. I'm just going to put it up, and I'm going to go past it and go right there. Okay. What that video was about was the research project that the South Koreans had come up with and how you actually use Dark Bard. But it's about a 10-minute video, but it's on the surface web, so you can go find it yourself. And if anybody's interested, I can give you the URL to pull it out. So let me wrap this up. A lot of what I've talked about over the last hour-ish or so is probably unnerving to folks as to where this is going, the power, the creative uses of AI by the underworld, by the criminals, the nation states, the spies, others that are out there. A friend of mine posted a question to their class, because this is one of the concerns we have in the university world is the use of AI, students using it to write term papers, to answer questions, rather than doing actual research. Let's just use ChatGPT to do it for me. So here's what showed up on social media. Gary Marcus, another researcher's suggestion, had my undergraduate class use ChatGPT for a critical assignment. I had them all generate an essay using a prompt I gave them, and their job was to grade it, look for hallucinated information, and critique its analysis. That's a pretty cool assignment, right? So rather than, here's your assignment, and fearful that somebody might use an AI LLM to write it, tell them write it, but then critique the output. All 63 essays had hallucinated information. There were fake quotes, fake sources, or real sources misunderstood and mischaracterized. Every single assignment. I was stunned. I figured the rate would be high, but not that high. The biggest takeaway from this was that the students all learned that it isn't fully reliable. Before doing it, many of them were under the impression it was always right. Their feedback largely focused on how shocked they were that it could mislead them. Probably 50% were unaware it could do this. All of them expressed fears and concerns about mental atrophy and the possibility for misinformation or fake news. You understand where this is going? An actual rational fear that if I'm using LLMs and it's feeding me all this fake information or incorrect information, what's it doing to my brain? What is it teaching me? And should I back away from it? Is this like a new drug or something that might actually cause me to hallucinate because I'm believing it's a machine talking to me, the machine must be right. So they go on. One student was worried that the neural pathways formed from critical thinking would start to degrade. Wow. That your own brain, if you use these LLMs too much, might actually start to regress. One other student, this is the cool quote, I want this to be your takeaway. One other student opined that AI both knew more than us, but is dumber than we are since it cannot think critically. That's a huge takeaway. And that student says, I'm not worried about AI getting to where we are now. I'm much more worried about the possibility of us reverting to where AI is. Wow. As a human species, by creating these things that can't think critically, that we begin to regress rather than moving forward. That's a powerful, powerful takeaway. Keep that in mind also in the criminal world. If they get so hooked on AI and LLMs as their little engine, that same thing can happen to them. They can begin to regress. And anybody else who's using this, thinking that it's the new future and we got to be into it, you may wind up going the wrong way, just as a huge takeaway. All right, I mentioned, I'll get to questions just a second. I mentioned I was from Auburn. I have to do the Auburn pitch. We have a really cool AI program called AI at AU. So on a break, if you get a chance, go over. We got a little booth over there. Talk to the lady. She can tell you all about what we're doing at Auburn. I had to put that little pitch in there. I think we've got a couple minutes left. You had a question down here?
My question is, I have an 8-year-old daughter, and I work with the School for Gifted Children. So they're all probably aware of everything you just talked about. TikTok is something that is of great concern to me from the cybersecurity threat perspective from China. And so I'm wondering, do you have any advice or direction for, there's a lot of students here in this room, for us? Is there, how do you stay relevant in the technology world, but protect yourself and protect our children? Because really, I think that's our biggest asset in the US is the minds of the future generation.
So that question was asked of me in the late 90s. I've got 2 daughters who are now moms, so I'm a grandfather. In the late 90s, they were just getting out of elementary school, starting middle school. And this is just as computers are coming of age, we're connecting things up, the internet's becoming something. We face that challenge as parents. What do we do with this new thing called the internet and our kids? And what we came up with and other parents was keep being a parent, being involved with the kids. Anything new they have, any new technology they have, you should also have it. As Facebook, social media came of age, we made sure we had accounts that were linked to their accounts so we could see who their friends were. Now I have to worry about my grandchildren. So first off, I've told them, don't get on TikTok, just stay away from it. I understand socially you may have to get on it because all your friends are on TikTok and you get isolated if you're not. So then it becomes a parental responsibility that, okay, get on TikTok yourself before your child does. Figure out how it works, figure out what the guardrails are, make sure your account is linked to their account so that you can continue to be a parent in cyberspace. And this will continue on with the AI and all the other stuff, is we can't just ignore it as parents and say the kids will figure it out. That's no different than, here, Johnny, here's the key to my Ferrari, go figure it out. That we wouldn't do that, right? So I don't want to sound negative, but I would just say stay away from TikTok. But I'm also realistic in the social implications of that this is the environment a lot of our kids are growing up in, and if they're not on it, they're being left out. It's like not going to the playground or.
It depends on sort of their age, because a lot of these Snapchat things are sort of come and gone, and as we're learning that China's using TikTok in a negative way against our children.
Oh, it's a huge influence campaign, right?
We could, as U.S. citizens, think, I don't want to be on TikTok because I'm giving them really not. We're setting ourselves up for.
This is a hard social question, a public policy question too. Now look at us as America. Since the dawn of Hollywood in the 1920s, for over 100 years, We've been pushing our values around the world.
Yeah.
We've been dominating the world with U.S. values. Yay, Team USA, okay? But imagine if you're Chinese or Russian or Iranian or some other culture, you're like, ugh. Okay, now we're seeing the opposite of that. Here comes China with their influence over the world, and we're like, whoa, what are you doing? And we're like, okay, but we've been doing this ourselves.
Yeah.
So we got to be honest, mentally honest in this debate. We've been dominating forever. What happens when a worthy opponent comes up and now challenge that dominance? Do we isolate ourselves or do we figure it out? Hopefully we figure it out.
Yeah, yeah.
But it is a scary proposition because they're beginning to push their values onto us the same way we were pushing our values onto them. And so this, we could go on for hours talking about
But I
what we
actually
need
really
to do,
like your
but-
answer, because what I think it's going to mean is we're going to end up somewhere in the middle.
somewhere in the middle.
So,
Yeah.
I think it's about education. You know,
Right.
in my world, it means that my daughter speaks fluent Mandarin and is understanding the culture.
Right.
So that, maybe we can meet somewhere in the middle in the future.
Well, and it's also in education, civic education,
Right.
awareness of how our country works, how the government works, what
For
makes
sure.
America America.
Yeah.
We're kind of losing that. We're not really teaching that like we used to, and we see civic groups going away. We see, that's not a new thing, this has been covered for years, the slow eroding of our society. So again, we could get into a whole neat conversation
No, but-
about
but
that,
thank
but you're
you. I think
spot
that's a
on with
great-
technology is
great answer.
amplifying it.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you. Any other quickies? And I realize we've got about 2 more minutes. Nope. All right, I give you 2 minutes to go get your coffee. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.